I'm well. How are you, sir?
I'm blessed. I'm blessed.
Good.
All right, this is WNTBD Today, and we are live. We are live. We are live, Tracy.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And greetings and welcome back, everyone, to What Needs to Be Done Today, also known as WNTBD Today Network. This podcast is sponsored by the MAAT American Tribal Nation. Peace and love to our wonderful podcast team, all of you who've joined us today, all those who watch this video later. All this month, we're continuing our celebration of our patriarchs and also in honor of Father's Day with the podcast, The Patriarch Speaks. Today's speaker is one of our amazing tribal members and patriarchs. We have Professor and Judge Ron Wilson. Even at such a young age, he has a very long and impressive, extensive career in numerous sectors. He is also a member of the MAAT American Tribal Council of Elders. He's our Director of Education and our Director of Membership. Judge Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Tracy. It is definitely an honor and a privilege to be with you here this morning, and I want to thank you for the kind invitation. Um, the topic of my discussion this morning, or I should say this afternoon, is going to be on the value of mentoring. I'll give you some background on me and some of my experience in the field of mentoring, as well as answer any questions that you may have regarding my experience or my opinion as it relates to mentoring. It is not research based in the sense that I will not be citing or referencing any authorities in the area. And my opinion, of course, is my opinion and not necessarily the opinion of the MAAT, American Aboriginal Tribal Nation. So first of all, let me give you a little bit of background on myself. Um, my name is Ron Wilson. I am originally from Massachusetts, Springfield, Massachusetts, to be specific, and I currently reside in Tucson, Arizona. I moved to Tucson, Arizona in 1999 to take a position uh, at the Pima County Attorney's Office. I One of the reasons why mentoring is so important to me is because I grew up in the foster care system. I spent 16 years in foster care, and during that time, I've had over 400 brothers and sisters at a variety of stages during that 16 years from a number of different backgrounds in terms of race, ethnicity, gender identity, etc. And I could tell you story after story about what that experience was like in the different eras from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and how the demographic of foster children changed so significantly from the 70s until the 90s. But one of the things that was really important to me during that time period, one of the things that helped keep me grounded was having responsible adult men in my life who helped guide me and modeled the type of behavior that they felt was value driven. And when I talk about values, I'm talking about integrity, honesty, respect, those types of values. values that are grounded in who we are, not just as creations of a divine being or God, but who we are as African peoples, the custodians and the parents of this planet, the fathers and mothers of nations and civilizations. And so I was very fortunate throughout my entire life, um, through foster care, to have a number of patriarchs or men who poured into me their wisdom. And that included not only hoping that and having faith in me and hoping that I would not repeat the same mistakes that they made, but also giving me an opportunity to fall forward and to fail without the consequences ending my life, ending my freedom, or ending some of the rights that we hold so dear in the United States. Unfortunately, we live in a society where not everybody has the protections that I was afforded. And as a direct result of them making mistakes, they find themselves either arrested, on drugs, homeless, incarcerated, or even dead because they made a mistake and that mistake had tragic consequences. I did not experience that. I had everyone from drug dealers and gangbangers to law enforcement officers who made it a point to protect me and to guide me in a way that put me in the position that I am right now. And so, as Tracy mentioned, Judge Wilson, I was a municipal court judge for close to 12 years. I was first appointed at the age of 33 as the chief presiding judge of that municipal court. And I am honored to say that appointment was historical for a couple of reasons. One, I was the first Black chief presiding judge in the history of the state of Arizona, which is something that I'm proud of, but also something that is troubling. This happened in 2002, and it says a lot about the state of our country and the state of Arizona, where the first Black chief presiding judge was not seated until 2002. Um, at that time, I was also the youngest Black chief presiding judge in the entire country. And that's something that I'm also extremely proud of. There are judges now who are younger than me, but at the time I was the youngest chief. I also served as the national chair of the American Bar Association's Judicial Division Specialty Courts Committee, where I created some of the first problem-solving courts in the country, the first veterans courts, domestic violence courts, drug courts, homeless courts in the nation that were fully funded through the court's budget and the budget of the municipality in which I was employed. We received no funding from the state and we received no funding from the federal government. We were completely self-sustaining. In those courts, when we talk about mentoring, one of the reasons why I established those courts and one of the reasons why those courts were so important was because we leveraged mentoring relationships and the concept of restorative justice to try to heal not just the victims, but also the offenders. We know from research that hurting people hurt others. And oftentimes, in many of these cases, from substance abuse, where it's self-medication, to even domestic violence, where it's trauma and anger management related issues, that not only does the victim need help, but the perpetrator also needs help. And the last place they're going to get that help is in jail or in a line waiting to pay their fines. And so what I did was established a number of different alternatives to incarceration so that people could get counseling, probation, um, go to school, even go to church. There was a time there were a couple of people, and I almost got in trouble for this one. There were a couple of situations where people owed so much money, and I knew they couldn't afford to pay the money. but they were God-fearing people. And so I would give them credit toward their fine for going to church. And all they would have to do is every week bring in a letter from their pastor saying that they spent a couple hours in church and that they volunteered at the church or maybe cleaned up at the church. And I would pay them $25 an hour. Now that money was not coming out of my budget. It was money that they owed the court, and I was setting it aside, or I was suspending that balance in order to help them pay off that outstanding fine. It would also, in many cases, assist them in getting their license back, because we in Arizona, unlike other major cities, it's really difficult to find employment if you don't have transportation. And the busing system in Arizona is not the greatest, but we do have it, and we do not have a rail system. So it's not like people could use a truck, go take a trolley or a subway to get to work. So having transportation was really important. So taking away someone's right to drive is really like a death sentence. Um, and not only were they impacted, but their entire family would be impacted. Sometimes four generations would be impacted because that vehicle was attached to the driver, and if the driver didn't have a driver's license, oftentimes the insurance for that vehicle would be suspended and the registration for that vehicle would be suspended. So even if you had four or five people in the house that could drive, that vehicle could not be on the road as long as the person who owned the car or who that vehicle's registration, the person it was registered to had a suspended license, the car was not drivable. So another reason why I led with compassion and empathy in order to give them options and to, I want to say protect them, but to protect our society. Because oftentimes, if you don't provide these opportunities, people will recidivate. And before you know it, a minor misdemeanor turns into a felony, and a fine turns into years of incarceration. Families are broken up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where did this all come from? This all came from the roles and the relationships mentors had on me as I was growing up, as a child in Western Massachusetts. It was my mentors not only exposed me to alternative ways of thinking because they came from so many different backgrounds. When we talk about manhood and what manhood means, but they also sacrificed and were willing to take risks with me. And so I took that relationship and those types of relationships and I embedded them in the court system. And so it's a little bit about my title, judge, and the role. I'm retired from that position now, have been for a few years, but that's where that comes from. And even to this day, people in the community here in Tucson refer to me as their judge. They don't call me Judge Ron or Judge Wilson. They say, "How's my judge?" Because of the relationship that I had with the community. And in fact, I've ironically have had people call me from all parts of the country, from New York and Chicago, Detroit, and Texas while I was on the bench, asking if they could have their cases transferred into my court because they heard about what type of work what type of judge I was, which I thought was very, very flattering. It was like one of the biggest honors in the world to get a call from Alabama from someone saying, "Hey, I heard about you and I was just wondering if I could get my case transferred into your court." And the obvious answer was no, but I was still flattered the by the opportunity. The other thing that was really another moment during the time that I was on the bench that I'll never forget was, and again, it speaks to the value of mentoring. I'd probably been on the bench a year or so, and there was a defendant, an African American male, older male from Texas, who had gotten stopped for a speeding violation here in Arizona. And he was in my courtroom for an arraignment. My court was extremely busy. In fact, I processed in the 12 years that I was on the bench, I processed over 100,000 cases, which is unheard of. My court was the busiest per capita court in the country at the time. You won't hear about it because the population of the city was so small, but my court was more active than any court in Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, you name it. And so another reason why taking a problem-solving approach to justice and starting these community courts was so important. But at any rate, he was in the court. He had sat in the courtroom all day, all morning. He was one of the last cases that I had called, and so he had an opportunity to hear me speak to the defendants, to watch me interact with all of the various players in the theater. And so from police officers, correctional officers, probation officers, prosecutors, defense attorneys, you name it, counselors, my court was always packed with an array of characters. And so he sat and he listened. And at the very end, this is a speeding ticket. And he's from Texas. His fine would have been about $100. So at the very end, I'm expecting him to ask for a payment plan or to just pay the fine outright. He was driving a very nice vehicle, but he asked for a trial. And it kind of caught me off guard. And it even caught the attention of many of the other characters in the courtroom. And so I said, you do realize that the fine is, $100. He goes, yeah. He goes, but I want a trial. I want to fight this. So I said, okay. And he asked if I could push it back 3 or 4 months because he had to go back to Texas, take some time off of work, and then come back to Arizona. So I said that. I said, okay, that's fine. So fast forward, 3, 4 months go by. He comes back, and we have the trial. And during the trial, he was the most difficult defendant that I had ever come across. He was yelling at me. He was challenging me. He was challenging my authority. He was cursing at me. He was the most disrespectful defendant that I had ever had. It was the hardest, and I would say at the time, the most challenging case that I've ever sat on. Excuse me. At the end of the trial, he was found responsible and decided that he wanted to pay the fine in full that day. So I agreed. I assumed everything was over, and the police officer left, and he said, Judge, I just have one more thing that I need to say to you. And I was like, okay, let me have it. You didn't hold back throughout for the past 2 hours, again on a speeding violation. So let me have it. And at that point, he stepped aside, and in the back of the courtroom was this little black boy. And he goes, I want to introduce you to my grandson. And he goes, and I want to apologize to you for how I acted today. But I wanted my grandson to see you, and I wanted my grandson to hear you, and I wanted my grandson to know that there's no situation that he will ever face or no type of confrontation or anything that anyone could say to him that could ever justify him becoming indignant. And you did and showed him exactly that. And so the grandson stood up. He came to the front. He introduced himself. I introduced myself to him. The defendant again apologized and thanked me, and then also affirmed and said, I knew this is who you were. And he goes, and I knew this is how you would respond. He goes, I put my trust and my faith in the Lord and in my instincts, and you are the man that I thought you were. And so after him saying that, the courtroom exited. I actually got off the bench and I invited the young man up to the bench, and I put on I put the robe on them, and and I let them hold the gavel, et cetera, et cetera. And about 4 years ago, I had gotten a letter from the gentleman who was a defendant in the courtroom at the time, and he said that his grandson had gone on to college and was studying to be a lawyer and wants to be a judge. And so that's one of the proudest moments that I have in terms of the value of mentoring and how modeling behavior and how pouring into people, even if they are not your own children, can have an impact that is immeasurable in a ripple effect that can be felt not only around the world, or excuse me, around the country, but also around the world. And so when I talk about the value of mentoring, I'm not only speaking about, of course, myself or men mentoring young boys, but the role that mentoring plays in not only our history as a people, but also the role mentoring plays in the communities in which we live. And so I just wanted to encourage people to serve as mentors or to support mentoring relationships or mentoring organizations, whether it's in your church or some place like Big Brothers and Big Sisters. As an aside, one of the things that people don't know about mentoring is that the first mentoring organization in the United States, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, was actually founded by a judge and an attorney out of New York City, actually the South Bronx. They founded it during the turn of the century, I believe it was in 1920. Judge Coulter and Ernest Mayer. It was Ernest Mayer and Julius Coulter that are co-founders of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And they created Big Brothers and Big Sisters as an opportunity, or Big Brothers, as an opportunity for wayward children who were street urchins, running the streets of the Bronx, who weren't really getting into a lot of trouble, but creating mischief. It was an opportunity for them to be matched with a responsible male adult who, like in my case, would be taught certain values as it relates to morality, integrity, dignity, self-respect, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been talking now nonstop, I believe, for close to 20 minutes. I want to take a break and answer any questions that you may have about my background as a judge or the value of mentoring before I continue.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Judge Wilson. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, heart, and wisdom with us. And we love that you even shared so much of your personal life and experiences. Absolutely amazing. We're super grateful for you. And like Judge Wilson said, we definitely want to open up the floor for any questions you have for him, any comments, anything that you'd like to share. Please do. The floor is open. I can't see if anyone has hands raised, but please go. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. Chief Malo, I do see your hand raised. The floor is yours.
I have a funny story too. One funny story that I'm going to tell you about my time on the bench. I think it's funny, but I have dad humor. I am a dad, so you might not. Chief Malo, you have a question.
Oh, well, no, I wasn't going to really ask a question. I was going to thank you for that. As far as what the mentoring that you talked about. First of all, I didn't know that you were from Massachusetts. When you talk about the mentoring, I remember when my children were young, very young, I did have a mentor for both of them from the Big Brothers and Big Sisters. So it's good to know where that, actually originated. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah. So
No,
I had other comments, but I like I said, I don't like to take up time to do all the other people might have questions and want to make
sure.
comments.
No.
I just
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Chief.
You know how I feel about you. Okay, so
Yeah.
I think you're wonderful.
She feel it's
You
good.
know,
It's good, right? A good
I'm
thing.
just so much you've done for our community and for the people, and everything that you bring to the tribe and you have available. And our people should know that he is a great mediator. He's great with you. Just he has great resources available. And as far as the mentoring, this is what we need today. Okay, so and I'm going to be quiet, let other people comment or talk.
Yeah, our
But
children, our youth need, our adults need mentors. I have mentors. I'll be 57 this year, and I have mentors. And so you're never too young or never too old to either be a mentor or have a mentor. And there are so many different ways you can do it. You can do it formally through how Chief described, and I referenced big brothers, big sisters, but you can also do it informally. Brother Marquise spoke about this the other day in terms of the relationships that he had with many of the men in his life growing up. Although it may not have been formal mentoring, from the way he explained it, they were definitely mentors. And so, and he's doing the same in his life with men, little boys or girls, who he believes in his heart of hearts, and I agree with him, need to see positive male role models who not only pour into them, but also hold them accountable and give them opportunities to fall forward. And so I want to call out Brother Marquise and thank him for continuing that legacy and carrying that legacy forward. And you, Chief, you are a mentor as well. I've learned so much from you in the past few months that I've been a part of this nation, invaluable information regarding leadership and direction and how to organize large groups of people. And so thank you for your mentorship as well.
bless your heart. I say.
I want that dad joke we were promised.
So this is so this happened. This really happened. I think it's funny, but you guys might not think it's funny. But some people think it's inappropriate. But hey, you know what? I'm the judge. So at any rate, so I had a court. It was a hearing. Like I said, the courtroom was packed. It was probably one of the busiest days that I've ever seen in the courtroom, and we probably seat close to 300 people, 200 people, I'll say. And there were about 300 people in the courtroom that day. And we've had about 30 inmates who are chained together in their orange jumpsuits that were being transported from the local jail for their arraignments. And many of the inmates were felons, violent felons who needed to get their misdemeanors taken care of before they went to their minimum or maximum security prison. And we had law enforcement agents outside. All three walls within the courtroom were filled with law enforcement agents standing, because there was so many people and there were so many defendants. We had the DA was in there, the state police were in there, the municipal police were there, and the sheriff's department was there. So I just want to paint a picture of what was going on in the courtroom at the time. And again, I was new. I had only been on the bench for a couple of weeks. And so I had a stack of files. So all of the case files, this was the back in the day before computers, and we had computers, but we weren't using them as efficiently as we are now. And so we had the old school manila folders, and each defendant had a folder, and some of them had multiple folders. Usually a folder could contain maybe 10 citations and police reports at most. And so I noticed that one particular folder had about 15 that folders, and they were all put together by rubber bands. And so the stack for this one particular defendant had to be at least 10 to 12 inches high. And so, and remember, each one of those files had a minimum of 5 to 10 not police reports, citations. But each one of those citations one piece of paper could have 5 different crimes. And
Wow.
so I'm required to go through every single one of them, add up how much potential jail time the person was doing or could do, fines the person could be subjected to, and probation the person could be imposed if they were found guilty or they pled guilty to every single crime. And so it took me literally about 25 minutes to go through all of them. And I called the gentleman's name, and he stood up, and so I began. I didn't read all of the statutes, but I gave him the summary, and I said, Mr. Smith will say, I've gone through all your cases. You've been charged with this many misdemeanors. I think it was like 150 or 250 misdemeanors. You've been in class 1, 2, and 3. In the jail time, if you were found guilty or pled guilty, would be, I want to say it's like 250 years in prison.
Oh my God.
The probation you were looking at was about 500 years of probation, and the fines were over $1 million. And you could hear a pin drop. And I said, but I do have good news. I just saved a lot of money on my car insurance by switching the guy. By switching the guy. So literally, the police officer, this is one thing, the police officers, I got to give them to them. You could see tears coming down their faces.
Oh, no.
They did not move, but you could just see teardrops coming down their faces. About half of them had to leave the courtroom, and you could just hear them laughing outside. And then on cue, just like they're an orchestra, all the guys that were sitting in the orange jumpsuits, their bodies just flopped forward, and all you could see was their bodies going up and down, and the chains rattling because they were laughing so hard. So the defendant, he really couldn't grasp everything. Make a long story short, I ended up dismissing almost all of them. He had already been in jail for about 3 months because he's a homeless veteran who suffered from PTSD, and all of the charges were criminal trespass, drinking in public, sleeping on park benches, failure to ID. He probably had at least 300 or 400 warrants. And so I just dismissed everything and gave him time served, and then released him into the custody of one of the local churches. And he never recidivated and never offended again. But up until that time, he was the typical revolving door. And I could see, even when I was going through the police reports, that the officers didn't even want to really arrest him, but oftentimes they didn't feel like they had a choice because he was a big guy, and he was a veteran, and he looked intimidating, and people get scared, and you just can't pick them up and take them somewhere else and drop them off, especially if they're homeless. So the officers would take him into custody, thinking they're helping him out because he would get, free dental care, he would get free vision, he'd get a shower, a place to stay, and some food. So that's one of the cases that I'll never forget. And so some people, they think, oh my God, how you could do that, and other people they think it's a riot. So.
I love that. That is wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Brother Mark has a question. Brother Mark, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. How's everyone today?
Great, thank you.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Loved your speech, and I think one of the things that touched me the most is just how your approach, right? So the approach is everything, and understanding that there's going to be grace that's given. Not saying to necessarily earn it, but there's always grace, and you keep that in mind. My question was, in your upbringing, and you had mentors. Normally with mentors, there's going to come accountability. Do you remember a time that it kind of stood out where one of your mentors made you accountable for something, and you had to say, "Okay, I got it," and I appreciate you making me accountable because I didn't see it that way, or I could have went, in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And that happened to me daily. There are any number of different things. I grew up playing sports, primarily basketball, and I was also a martial artist. And so my sensei, as well as the other instructors in the dojo, I studied three different types of martial arts, were always holding me accountable, and my coaches, whether it was basketball or track. And so if I made a mistake on the floor, or if I made a mistake with a particular kata, whether intentional or not, there was always a consequence. But the consequence was always given with love, and it was instructional. It was not a punishment, but it was a teaching opportunity. And by holding me accountable, it made me a better person. They never enabled me and they never made excuses for me. If I was injured or if there was something that I couldn't do because I didn't have the capacity to do it, they had enough empathy and self-awareness to say, okay, you're not going to run today, or you're not going to fight today, or you're not going to play, or we're going to sub you out, because they had enough intuition, and they spent enough time getting to know me and didn't treat me just like another player, that they could see when I needed some grace, and they could see when I needed accountability, and then they could address or adjust that level of grace or consequence or accountability based on what was going on with me. Because again, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the foster care system, but it's a very traumatic experience. And
Yeah.
not just from the fact that you're torn from your family, and in my case, I had no contact with any of my biological family. And so there's the trauma of that, but also the trauma of being abandoned, them not looking for me or even wanting me. And so that was something that I always struggled with. And there are plenty of times, whether I was on the field or in the arena or the rink or on the court, where something would trigger me and I would just vanish, in terms of my my awareness. I would just disappear, and they would catch it, and they would say, okay, you can't do that because you're going to get hurt, or you're going to hurt someone else, or we're going to take a loss, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they sometimes they say you need to snap out of it, and sometimes and hold me accountable. Sometimes they would say, okay, you need to run some laps, or you need to do some push-ups, or or you need to do these assignments. But yes, absolutely, Marquise, accountability and consequences help establish those boundaries and help keep me organized, because I was all over the place emotionally and physically. I was constantly running. I was always on the run, and I put run in air quotes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead, Brother Marquise. I'm sorry.
No, I was just, thanking them for giving that response. So I can identify with, some of those things. But I think that the main thing is um, the awareness of the person that you're dealing with, understanding, and then you're understanding that when they explain it, it's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah,
So it allows you to take it in and be like, okay, I don't do that. But it's also a learning opportunity. Like you said, it allows you to grow and become the man that you are today.
yeah. One of the things that I really appreciated too from them, which I've tried to adopt myself, is that they recognized that they weren't perfect, and they knew that they didn't have all the answers. And so their humility was also something that really moved me, because we would often learn together, rather than, it being a, you know, teacher-student relationship, even though that's how I always saw it. Now, as an adult, I see that it was more symbiotic, and it was more of a partnership.
Excellent. And I had a question, Judge Wilson. It's kind of a long question. I hope it makes sense. So
Sure.
you attribute your life choices to the mentors you had. And this
Mhm.
may seem like a redundant question with an obvious answer, but if you had encountered mentors who taught you to sell drugs, join gangs, commit crimes, do you think you would have turned out to be a completely different person than you are now? I want to add with that, having the spirit that you have, having the soul that was born inside your body, the mind, the heart that you have, do you think you still would have turned to a life of crime because you had those mentors? Or do you think you would have said, no, I don't want this type of life. I want something different. I want something better.
Yeah. That's a great question. And so I did have those. So I did have mentors who taught me all of those things that you just mentioned. But in the breadth of them teaching that to me, like firearms, for instance, is a perfect example. I learned all about firearms when I was an infant. And one of the reasons why I learned and why I was taught about firearms was so that I could respect firearms and then make an informed decision about whether or not I would carry or whether or not I wouldn't. What I would do if I found myself in a situation where I was confronted, um, based on what I knew a firearm could do, which firearms, calibers, et cetera, et cetera. And so the same was true with gangs, drugs, and some of the other things that you just mentioned. I had mentors who taught me, who showed me, who said, hey, Ron, this is how you do this. Hey, Ron, this is how we're doing that. Hey, I want you to see this so that I could have a choice and I could make an informed decision. They didn't choose for me, they gave me the option. And I think I chose wisely 9 times out of 10, but there were times when I didn't choose the right path, where I made decisions that weren't in my best interest or hurt other people. But I always knew it was my choice. I never felt that society or my community or anything else was the reason why I was making these decisions and I was in the situation I was in. I knew that I always had an option. And the only way that I could truly, for me, understand that I had an option from their perspective was knowing both sides. And then they were proud of me. Some of them weren't. Some of them were like, man, we need you. We want you to do this, you're that, and the other. But most of them were like, good for you. I'm glad that you chose not to do this. I'm glad you didn't choose this lifestyle. You're better than that. And many of them would even say, I want you to have the choices that I didn't have when
Mm.
I grew up. And so yeah, I had those. But that's a great question. And in my faith, I grew up as a Christian, and I can't stress the role that God and my faith also played in the choices that I made growing up and the choices that I make now. And so I think the combination of the two, and I've always seen, I love the stories of the Bible, and I was always been attracted to Moses. The story of Moses is one that's always resonated with me, and and I find a lot of similarities in his story and in my story, and so that also played a huge part in in my journey is my faith.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you. God bless you for immensely, for eternally, for making the right decisions and all the countless, countless lives that you have blessed and benefited just by
Yeah,
making the right choices. So thank you. I'm so,
thank you.
so
Yeah,
grateful for that. And
thank
Chief
you.
Melo, I see your hand up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, and I concur with Tracy, but I have one question, Ron. I know you worked in more the municipal court. You worked more so in the civil. Okay. And I know
Criminal.
you talked about which I agree with, restoring the victim, but restoring the perpetrator also. Okay.
Hmm.
Well, how does that play into, because that's what we're, also doing to do with our courts, but how does that play into those who have do the violent crimes? You see what I'm saying? I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
It's, and which is, I personally do not understand at all, but
Yeah.
if you shed some light on that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So, to clarify, I probably processed as many criminal cases as I
Oh,
did traffic.
okay.
Most of the cases that I processed were domestic violence
Yeah.
cases. And so but there are misdemeanors. A lot of DUIs, but I'd say the DVs were number one looking back at it. And when we talk about violence, we have to bifurcate it. It's like race or ethnicity or language or even religion. All of it can't fit into one box.
Right.
One word cannot describe the plethora of differences that exist when we talk about violence. I was a sexual assault investigator for about 10 years and investigated probably over 1,000 sexual assaults on college campuses from coast to coast. And not one of those was the same. They were all different. And so when it comes to violence, I would say you can't take a cookie cutter approach to dealing with it. You have to look at each situation for its uniqueness. You have to look at each situation for what it is and not necessarily, and it's almost impossible with the system that we have today to apply the same consequences for every single case. Now, there are going to be some that you can group in the categories, but for the most part, you really have to take time to look at the relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. You have to look at the motive or the intent. You have to look at whether or not there was a weapon involved. You have to look at whether it was some form of self-defense. You have to look at how was it, who initiated it. You have to look at was there some form of escalation. You have to look at even the power dynamic between the parties, or if there were others involved instigating in some capacity or enabling. There are so many different factors you have to look at. Violence in prisons, for one thing. I'm not, years and years ago when I first graduated from law school, actually, when I was in law school, I used to represent defendants who were in prison charged with various forms of violence um, while incarcerated. And let me tell you, it was an eye opener when I would talk to not only the correctional officers, but the inmates about the culture, the prison culture, and how that culture even varied from race to race, from ethnicity to ethnicity, from religion to religion, from prison to prison, from state to state. There is so much complexity um, when it comes to violence and how to address violence, excuse me, how to address violence in our communities. And so I would say I don't have an answer to it. My only answer would be that much more evidence-based research needs to be done on solutions, and we need to start moving away from the prison being the end all be all and the only solution that we offer to people who find themselves as defendants in a crime of violence.
I should. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. And we're going to open up the floor one more time. If there's anyone there that has any questions for Judge Wilson, any comments, anything that you would like to share, please do. You don't have to raise your
No,
hand. You can go forward. Oh, go ahead, Judge
no, I was
Wilson.
going to say one other thing I just want to mention regarding the question of violence. And I think me and Marquise might have talked about this at one point, is the epigenetic trauma that's handed down from generation to generation. And how oftentimes when you look at violence, um, like substance abuse, it's a cry for help and or like I explained in my upbringing, sometimes people don't have a choice. Or like in the case of the grandfather who brought the grandson, the children are raised in an environment where violence is seen as an act of love, or
Mhm.
violence is seen as the way that men resolve problems, whether it's toxic masculinity or the machismo, identity that we often see in Latin cultures. Violence is part of the culture. And so we have to really take a look at that as well and sort through all of the cultural norms and things that are often accepted in families or in communities because it's part of it's part of their identity. And I know, again, growing up in on the East Coast in Massachusetts, um, a shout out to my Italian and my Irish friends. They were quick to fist. I mean, they did not back away from a fight. They wouldn't pick up a gun, but they will pick up a fist in a heartbeat, and they'll battle it out. And next thing you know, they're out having drinks, moving on. No hard feelings. They were all boxers, and they loved this. They loved to box, and 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 oftentimes they would get arrested for assault or for some other violation of a statute related to violence,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't want to prosecute because they liked to fight, and fighting was part of their culture, even though it was against the law. So that's the only other thing that I want to add, is that oftentimes it's cultural, but it's also trauma based, and it's these, I don't even say traditions, that are passed down from generation to generation, that are part of, so what some would may call toxic masculinity today, or machismo.
Well, that I was thinking about that. That's a difference with the and it's funny I should say that, but men, doing that to each other because that they're men and that's how they interact. I have a real issue when men do
Mhm.
that to women
Oh
or
yeah. Yep.
children,
Our children.
just
Yep. Yep. That's why I was saying it's got to be, each situation is unique, and you got to look at each situation differently, because you're absolutely right. Two boxers deciding they're going to have it out on the streets rather than in the rink is very different than, some man beating up on a child or on his defenseless wife.
Well, I think Sister Carmela has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. It took me a long time to find this little hand to go up. I just want to thank you, Brother Ron, and our other great patriarchs who have spoken uh, last Saturday and last Wednesday, that you don't just talk the talk, but you're walking the walk. And the Bible says, be a living epistle that's read of men. And so I just from listening to all of you, I believe that you are just showing people who you are by how you live. And so that's great. My question has to stem around, because you've been a mentor for quite a while. What do you see as the biggest need among our young men? We'll answer the women tomorrow or the next month. But what is the biggest need amongst the young men of today as when you first started mentoring?
Good question. Um, Today, I would say, and it really depends, because there are so many different categories of men, not just in terms of age, but also economics, et cetera, et cetera. I would say the biggest category, and it kind of goes to what Marquise was saying earlier, is holding them accountable with love, not being judgmental, but ensuring that they know um, that they're cared for, that they are loved, that they won't be abandoned, that you won't turn your back on them, that you are going to be loyal and you are going to be faithful. But that doesn't mean that mentee can do whatever they want. That doesn't mean that you're going to enable them or make excuses for them. That you are going to hold them accountable, and there are consequences. but you're going to connect them to the resources
Yeah.
that they need in order to change their behavior, and then give them the ongoing support so that that behavior can be sustained. So it's not just a one-off where, you know, they make a good decision and it's like, okay, now you're good, I'm going to let you go. It's mentoring relationships. I remember when I first started, um, it was encouraged that you be a mentor, formal mentor for a year, you know, with big brothers, big sisters. And you mentor for a year and then you can move on. Now, these young boys need 4 or 5 years of a really strong, sustained relationship with men, a stable relationship with men, in order for them to really get it, in order for it to anchor, anchor them, and then, you know, give them the strength and the confidence they need to kind of go it, but you know, not on their own, but as a mentor themselves. And so it's almost like nowadays you're going to be a mentor for life, whereas 20 years ago you just sign up for a year and then you could, you know, you can move on.
That's a big change in years.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big change. But society, and I would even say COVID kind of push that like if you would have asked me pre-COVID, I would have probably been okay, a year can do it. But post-COVID, I've seen a number of different things, especially in terms of maturity, wisdom, decision making that have set us back probably 10 years. You know, that 3 years has probably set us back 10 years. And so so you might be mentoring someone in their 20s, but they may have the maturity level of a 6 or 7 year old.
That's right.
Mm. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, it's different. It's when I was a kid, there were a lot of not men child, a lot of children who were like men. And I'm sure that even when you were younger, you know, if you look at your brothers or your uncles, you know, they had jobs at 14, 15 years old. You know, someone, you know, and then if your grandmother, you know, your grandpops was probably picking cotton at 5 or 6, you know. Nowadays, these guys are playing video games until their 30s.
Right.
Absolutely. And
What sort of backlashes were, I often think about the backlash that COVID put on our next generation. And I didn't even think as far as mentoring and the immaturity that some of these young men have.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we talk about it, oftentimes we will use the term men and male interchangeably, but I like to draw the distinction. There is a male is genetic. That's how you are identified at birth. Men, being a man is something that you learn. It's something that you're taught. And so we have a lot of males who are not men. And so, you know, teaching young boys how to be men is more important to me, my perspective, than teaching them how to be males. You want to learn how to be a male, you can read a medical journal.
That's right.
Shay. And this is Janiyah had put in the chat, you know, she apologized for coming late, but she wanted to congratulate you on the podcast. Much love to everyone. Boniface had posted greetings, everyone. Thank you, Brother Ron, for your compelling life experiences and willingness to pay it forward.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
All right. And thank you all so much for joining us. Next week this coming Saturday, we'll be continuing our celebration of our patriarchs and fathers and with the Patriarch Speaks podcast. Please be sure to join us this Saturday, June 14th at 10 a.m. Arizona time, Pacific Standard Time, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our guest speaker will be Menace Ankh El. Thank you so much again to our amazing speaker, amazing, wonderful person, Judge Ron Wilson, another one of our phenomenal patriarchs and MAAT tribal members, father, mentor. times 1,000. Thank you so much for who you are, all that you do. Thank you so much to our wonderful podcast team, our tribal members, all who've joined today, all who are watching and will watch this later. Peace and love, everyone. We'll see you next Saturday. Have a great week.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Good love.
Thank you.
Peace and
Peace
love.
and love.